Okay, first today we're going to talk about the dome. So everyone knows what a dome is, right? The dome is it's a fancy roof. It's something besides a flat, straight roof. A flat roof, very easy to do. You lay down some timbers or whatever, and you make a flat roof. But a dome is something fancy. It requires a little extra engineering and some know-how. It goes way back. So in the old days, there were what they call corbelled domes that were tombs, or sort of beehive tombs, and those were made of stacked stones, right, of different sizes and things. Kind of hard to engineer, so not everybody got that. And that made you an important person if you were buried in a beehive, sort of dome like that. So a dome is just a roof, or the top of a room that's based on an arc, right, part of a circle. So domes were always around in the ancient world, but they were rare. So the Romans, of course, being Romans, they loved the domes and they wanted to make bigger and better and more amazing domes. So you started to find domes only in special places. Like if you are a very wealthy person, you might have a domed room in your house. They had them at some of the Roman baths, the really very fancy Roman baths. They would have domes. The Temple of Mars was famously had a dome on top of it. So the most famous dome, though, of course, is the dome of the Pantheon. So the Pantheon is a really fascinating building. So it's based on a half circle, a half sphere. So if you walk into the Pantheon and you're standing on the floor, the bottom of the floor and the top of the dome represent a whole sphere, a whole circle. So to build this dome, they had to find a way to keep it from falling in, to keep it intact. So the first thing they did, the bottom part of the building is a big cylinder, like this. And so you don't actually have any of this in there, but you have a big cylinder, and then on the interior, you have this amazing half circular, half spherical dome. The bottom part of it is held in place by these very thick piers, these walls, and this cylinder that goes all the way around. And so the top of the dome is open. There's an opening in there called the Occulus, which just means eye. And then at the top of this dome, the concrete that they poured is very thin, because if it were thick, it'd be too heavy and it would collapse. So how do you hold that up? How do you make the rest of the dome? Well, the rest of the dome, they made gradually thicker. As it gets down, it gets gradually heavier. And then they also poured reinforcements around the dome, concrete reinforcements. Bands like this to hold the dome in place. So you see these bands on the outside. So when you look at the Pantheon from the outside, the dome looks pretty shallow. It doesn't look like a half sphere, but when you go inside, you see this giant spherical half dome. And in the old days, when it was first built, the entire surface of this dome was plated or covered with gold leaf. So it was incredible and amazing to look at. And then you had that oculus open to the sky, so you have light pouring in. And it's just an incredible structure. So this is the most famous dome in the ancient world. It is still the largest freestanding concrete dome in the world. So there is not another dome in the world that matches it. Now next we're looking at surveying. And surveying is really just about looking at the land and determining with precision, scientifically, how high is that hill in front of us, or how deep is that valley? How straight can we run this road? So they use that to lay out where they could put their roads, how to get the right angle on the aqueducts, the right grade, so that the water would run in the right way, not too fast and not too slow. And what they did mostly was they used what they called a groma. So a groma is basically just a stick, like a staff, about as tall as a man. And on the top of this stick, they had a sort of a cross, like this, at right angles. And then at the end of each of the parts of the cross, they would hang a line, and at the end of each line was a lead weight. And so if you drove this stick in the ground, and then you looked to make sure that these lines, these strings, were parallel to the stick, and you did that all the way around, then you knew that it was straight up and down. You knew that it was at right angles to the ground. So then you could plot a line, a straight line, and you knew that you were looking at it in the right way. And what they would do is they would send people, helpers, to stand and hold markers, and they would line all of these markers up, and that's how they knew where to put the roads. And they could continue doing that. At the end of each line, they would stand at the last marker and shoot another line. They could look backwards and make sure they were in a straight line. Now, the only problem was, because their mathematics was sort of limited, they could only survey straight lines. They really couldn't do curves. Now, finally, we're going to look at Hypocaust. Hypocaust is this brilliant sort of system of underfloor heating that the Romans came up with. And they used it to heat their baths. They used it to heat the swimming pools in the great Roman baths. They used it to heat the homes of, very wealthy people. So you had to have, a good bit of money to engineer something like this. But Hypocaust just means under or below, and caust means fire. So if you look at this, it just means the fire below. And so what they did, instead of having a fireplace sitting in the room with you and feeding the fire, the Romans figured out that if you built a stone or, brick floor, whatever it was, and you built another floor underneath it, basically a basement, and you supported this floor on pillars like this, and maybe some extra pillars to make sure it doesn't fall in. So this floor is elevated, and underneath, if you build fires under there, then the heat will rise up and heat your floor, and then the whole room is warm, right? And so they engineered this so that you could build fireplaces down here underneath. People would bring wood and keep the fires going, keep the floor warm, not too hot. And then in the walls surrounding all this, they would have open chambers inside the walls where the heat from the fire and the smoke and everything could go up through the walls. So you would have openings like chimneys higher up for the smoke to go out. But then the whole room was warm, and even the walls could be warm because you had warm air flowing up through the walls too.